Hello, everybody! Woo! X-Men! I'm excited to talk about X-Men with you all. I love the X-Men. Even though I have never read an X-Men comic in my life, I just love them so much. Name any of the cartoons. I've watched them all. The X-Men are the closest thing that I think I will ever have to a comic book fandom. Even if you don't think it's about race or gender or sexuality or whatever it's commonly said to be, we can all relate to feeling isolated or alone or different. And that's the genius of X-Men. It's hard to relate to the Avengers. They have perfect bodies. They are geniuses. They have superpowers and they save the world single-handedly. But the X-Men screw up. They make mistakes. Superpowers are just as much of a blessing as they are a curse. That's a lot more relatable. And the X-Men film series is just as much of a pioneer as the comics it was based off of. After the decline of the Batman series that started in 1989 with Tim Burton, it was one of the first superhero sagas alongside Blade and Spider-Man that pioneered that 2000s comic book renaissance. It survived the subsequent crash and has continued on into the Disney Marvel Golden Age. In 2016, after Deadpool became the highest-grossing X-Men film of all time, and X-Men Apocalypse underperformed by nearly $200 million, Fox has to face reality and change with the times. So I want to do a post-mortem on the series and all of its myriad successes and failures. With the death of its founding member, the 2000 superhero genre has finally ended. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I want to find out. How did these movies succeed and fail? Will these age poorly or very well? With all that said, let's go on a journey through the X-Men franchise at 20th Century Fox. Dun, da, dun, 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 This is where it all started, where all those trends began. You know, for a film so iconic and influential, I thought it would be more memorable. When the film ends and the credits roll, all I can really think is, meh. To be fair, in the era where Shaq was playing discount Iron Man and George Clooney was ruining Bruce Wayne, mediocrity was really great by comparison. However, what this movie gets right, it gets really right. Two areas in particular are just perfect. The casting and acting. With exceptions, though. Like him or hate him or be suspicious of him for the dismissal of his sexual assault allegations, Bryan Singer's true strength lies in casting. They say half of good direction is good casting. Time and time again, he finds the right people for the right roles. From hiring acting legends Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart as Magneto and Professor X, to reinventing Rebecca Romijn into Mystique, a lizard so hot I don't care about being called a furry. Or is that a scaly? For admitting that, to nailing Wolverine by casting a 6-foot-tall Australian musical theater star to play a 5-foot-tall Canadian lumberjack. Bryan Singer knows how to cast the X-Men. This falls apart when the character they're casting for is insufferable, though. More on that later. The acting is also pretty great in this movie. Pretty much everyone does their job really well. Famke Janssen does a really solid Jean Grey, and Halle Berry is pretty good but unremarkable as Storm. Her accent is really shaky sometimes, but when she doesn't have to fake her way through a half-assed accent, she's actually really good. She does a really great job in selling her powers through face acting, eye acting, and physical action. That's very impressive. A lot of actors don't know how to do that, but these people do. These ladies don't elevate the material, though. They just do their best with it. Stupid lines are still stupid lines.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Oh, come on! Where's the punchline? If you want to crack a one-liner, you gotta have a punchline. I mean, yes, things get shocked with electricity. What's your point? On the other hand, Shakespearean giants Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart just knock it out of the park. Like the ladies, these two do a lot to sell their powers through movements and actions. I just wish that they could have given Professor X more to do. But if you think about it, he is so powerful that he could pretty much end any battle before it started. So I see why they do write him out at the climax in each movie. I just still find it annoying. Ian McKellen, hot off the X-Men trilogy, does a great job as Magneto. This is the Magneto I love. Self-assured and confident. Not conflicted and more of an anti-hero than a full villain. Please, Simon Kinberg, please don't pull a Loki with Magneto. On the other hand, I really can't stand what they did to Rogue in these movies, and to a lesser degree Cyclops. If I had a body pillow, Rogue would be on it. I don't. Trust me, I don't. I really don't. Okay. Change the subject. Her character. I hate Rogue in this movie because she is so submissive, sheepish, and weepy. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it doesn't fit in with the character. It's not that she shouldn't be this tortured or conflicted, but the way she responds to it is wrong. Rogue is more like Deadpool in the way that she responds to hardship. She remains aloof, she cracks jokes, and she cracks skulls. She hides behind comedy to avoid her pain, while all that is lurking beneath. She isn't this submissive and weepy. She's not a Stephenie Meyer character. Her powers are also off. She was never allowed to just let loose and fight. And can't she fly? I do remember that happening before. And in the other cartoon, there was that episode where she used all of her powers that she ever absorbed at once. This is amazing. How can you overlook this insane opportunity for action and awesomeness? To be fair, I think that this would cost about the GDP of a small European country to finance that, but it would totally be worth it. For reference on how to do Rogue right, take a look at X-Men Evolution. I'd go goth for Rogue, but just not this one. Cyclops, on the other hand, is just a boring stick in the mud. There's nothing else to say. At least it's comic accurate. I just wanted to mention that Cyclops is still boring. Hey look! The sun is still shining! Wow! Notice how I've managed to write pages and pages about the characters and their interactions, but not a single sentence about the story. That's because, at its best, it is forgettable, and at worst, it is irrelevant and nonsensical. How can Magneto force Rogue to use the mutant maker machine? How can Magneto track her? He doesn't have Cerebro. The plot's just kind of there. But that's not the point. The point of this movie is to introduce us into the character and the lore of this world. The plot can't afford to be bland and inoffensive. Lord of the Rings practically boils down to going to the dump to throw something away. And it does very well at introducing us to this world, if a little bit heavy-handedly. The opening narration by Patrick Stewart, now a staple of the series, force feeds us all we need to know about the world before the first line of dialogue is. The action is also bland and inoffensive. The special effects are unfinished at best, and the action is downright amateur. Say what you will about the sequels, and especially the newer ones, but the action got a lot better. This movie plays like a stage play version of the X-Men. Reactions are slow, powers seem either useless or slow to react, and it's all awkward and unfinished. This isn't the fault of Bryan Singer so much as the fault of his second unit director, but the action here is just downright unforgivable. The only action that looks great is the Mystique fight. Rebecca Romijn plays Mystique as less of a master criminal and more of a kinky blue nudist. Hey, if you're not going to go be faithful to the comics, at least create something new and cool. That's the whole movie in a nutshell. Faithful to the comics, but not really. They name drop X-Men characters. Hey, is that Jubilee? So all you have to be Jubilee is wear yellow? She's Jubilee, not April O'Neil. That feeling of quasi-faithfulness is disconcerting throughout. While Bryan Singer does seem to be aware of the comics and why they work, he still appears to be a little bit ashamed of them in the little details, like the costumes and the writing. Say what you will about the new age of comic book movies, at least they aren't afraid to acknowledge what they're based off of. Although it isn't as ashamed of its source material as films like Batman Begins or Daredevil, it's in the same ballpark. Honestly, I enjoy this movie a lot more for what it isn't than what it is. It avoids most of the bad habits of the 2000s era superhero movies. I mean, at least there aren't any annoying, boring speeches. Looking at you, Nolan. The color palette isn't that bland, and the characters are allowed to crack some jokes and have some fun. But if I look at this film for what it is instead of what it isn't, I can't sum up any thoughts at all. It's a nothing movie. It just doesn't exist on its own. The key phrase there being on its own. Compared to its peers at the time, X-Men is a solid adaptation of a comic book. It nailed the personalities and the characters, mostly, and laid a solid foundation for a much better sequel. I do appreciate it for what it isn't, and I appreciate it for what it started. But as a movie, X-Men is just so underwhelming and lackluster. I'll see you next time.